Have you ever resented someone who had more than you? Come on, be honest. Even just a little bit? In this video, I'm going to reveal 3 psychological explanations for why we have a tendency to look down on people who have more than us. Plus, I'm going to tell you how this mindset, if left unchecked, can keep you from reaching your financial goals. Hi, I'm Dr. Brad Klontz. On this channel, we look at the best strategies to help you transform your relationship with money, master the psychology of wealth, and live a life of abundance. So check out the resources in the video description below, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing. Now let's get started. In 2009, I was interviewed by Paul Sullivan, the Wealth Matters columnist for the New York Times. In the middle of the Great Recession, he'd written a column about how the wealthiest people in America were experiencing financial anxiety, just like everyone else. Readers flooded his inbox. They were angry. Not only were they upset at, quote, the rich, they were outraged at Sullivan for caring to begin with. Do you know what the definition of a rich person is? Someone who has more than you. Sullivan wrote a follow-up piece titled, "All This Anger Against the Rich May Be Unhealthy." In that column, he wrote about the blame being placed on the rich and whether or not it was deserved. He also wrote about the potential personal downside to all of that anger. Now, Sullivan interviewed me for the piece, and we talked about the research I had done on money avoidance scripts, beliefs like money is bad, rich people are greedy, and people take advantage of others and become rich in that way. I told him that these beliefs are linked to poor financial outcomes and self-destructive behaviors. Now, my quotes in the piece led to me getting hostile emails, the first hate mail I've ever gotten, and I was accused of making excuses for, quote, the evil rich. Thanks a lot, Sullivan. I gotta tell you though, this experience stuck with me. I was shocked by the intense anger being directed at me for just reporting my research findings. At that time, the 1% were being called out as sociopaths who rigged the system and were responsible for the entire economic collapse. Tons of hostility was being unleashed at the rich. Stereotypes about the wealthy were flying all over the place. Things like rich people lack character, they don't want to pay their fair share of taxes, they're all old money, and they don't deserve their wealth. You know, that sort of thing. The problem, of course, is that these are caricatures. Of course, many wealthy people are good people. Many work hard, many had humble beginnings, and many actually don't mind paying their taxes. But the scientist in me wondered that maybe there is some merit to these stereotypes. I mean, is there? Like any good researcher, I saw these questions as hypotheses that needed to be tested. My curiosity grew over time, and in a follow-up conversation with Sullivan a few months later, we decided to collaborate on a research project exploring the topic in depth. We recruited over 1,000 subjects and examined these stereotypes, as well as the psychological differences between the ultra-wealthy and the mass affluent. We reported our findings in a paper called The Wealthy, a Financial Psychological Profile, which was published in the Consulting Psychology Journal. Sullivan also included some of the findings in his fabulous book, The Thin Green Line, The Money Secrets of the Super Wealthy, and I highly recommend this book. I've got a link to his book in the video description below. In the paper, we identified 3 psychological factors that help explain the feelings of resentment commonly felt towards rich people. Stay tuned, because after that, I'm going to tell you about how these 3 mindsets can keep you from reaching your financial goals. Here we go. Reason number 1, money ambivalence and cognitive dissonance. Enough with the psychobabble. Speak English, dude. Research shows that people with money avoidance scripts such as rich people are greedy or money corrupts are more likely to hold money worship scripts. Things like you can never have enough money or more money will make you happier. Now, these beliefs stand in stark contrast to each other. I mean, how can someone hate rich people and at the same time want to become one? Well, loving and hating something at the same time is called ambivalence. Loving and hating money at the same time is what I call money ambivalence. Now, being pulled in 2 separate directions can create intense psychological discomfort. To ease this pain, we pick out the more convenient side of the argument. We then reinforce our beliefs in favor of that argument, and we disregard evidence that conflicts with that belief. These mental attempts to ease our psychological discomfort is called cognitive dissonance. So how does this cognitive dissonance work with our money ambivalence? It's way easier to change our beliefs about money than to change our financial status, and it's much quicker. So to alleviate our psychological discomfort, we latch onto negative beliefs about the wealthy. If wealthy people are of a less desirable character, it's easier for us to feel good about not being one of them. We then engage in something called confirmation bias, where we search out for information that supports our belief that rich people are jerks, and there are plenty of examples out there, you don't have to look very far. But we also ignore or brush off any information to the contrary, information that might show you that wealthy people are doing good things for others or for the world. Ultimately, taking a position that disparages those who have more than us can allow us to feel better about ourselves. Reason number 2, the psychology of envy. Now, envy is a very unpleasant emotion. When we feel envious of someone else, basically we feel inferior because they have something we wish we had. When we feel envious, we feel resentment towards these people. We resent that the target of our envy has access to something we don't. Our envy intensifies the more closely that desired attribute is connected to our own sense of self-worth. At our core, when we feel envy, we feel inferior. Envy is also rooted in a sense of injustice. Not only do we resent the person we envy, we believe they don't deserve their advantage. Now, interestingly, our negative feelings tend to grow in intensity when the person we envy shares one or more of our own attributes. For example, I would tend to be more envious of a bald Caucasian male financial psychologist with strikingly good looks. As such, if you grew up poor, you're more likely to envy someone who is more successful than you are if they came from the same humble beginnings. The closer the person is to our own self-image, and the more closely we link what they have to our self-esteem, the worse we feel about ourselves and the more we end up despising them. Reason number 3, the theory of relative deprivation. Research has found that our sense of well-being is much more dependent on our sense of relative deprivation than on our actual income. Now, what does that mean? How we feel about our financial status is less about how much money we have in the bank and much more about how much money we have compared to those around us. The theory of relative deprivation helps explain why people in much poorer and sometimes even war-torn countries report significantly more happiness than the average American. It turns out that we really don't evaluate our life satisfaction based on objective reality. In fact, your life satisfaction is a subjective evaluation based on how you compare yourself to the people around you. Now, this has always been the case. However, a few decades ago, many of us had little exposure to what people had or didn't have outside of our closest family, friends, and neighbors. Also, in years past, there was less of a disparity between the haves and the have-nots. At most, years ago, the Sears catalog showed us the things we didn't have but might want. Today is very, very different. We're constantly bombarded by media all over the place with beautiful people having stuff or doing things we can't afford. We see the shiny new car or the sprawling country estate on television. On social media, we see our smiling, trim friends embracing their beautiful spouses while enjoying their exotic vacation with, of course, their perfect kids. Research has shown that when feelings of relative deprivation are intensified by exposure to people with higher levels of wealth, hostility, anger, and even violence towards these individuals increase. Now, these 3 psychological constructs help explain the negative feelings that many of us have towards wealthier individuals. But as promised, I'm going to tell you now how this mindset, if left unchecked, can keep you from reaching your financial goals. Research has also made clear that a negative view towards the wealthy and the rich can be harmful to the host. The stronger your bias against money, the more difficult it will be for you to increase your income, grow your wealth, and maintain your own financial health. Interestingly, the entire concept of wealth is subjective. Some of us create an invisible but powerful ceiling on our wealth that we refer to as your financial comfort zone. The further you go above this arbitrary financial line, the more you're likely to experience stress or even anxiety. The line becomes associated with moving away from your family and your friends and your socioeconomic herd. As long as you don't go above the line, you still aren't, quote, too wealthy, and therefore you still belong to your family or social group. If you aren't careful, your desire to stay closely attached to your tribe, which by the way is hardwired in your prehistoric brain, this desire may lead you to financial self-sabotage in what is basically a subconscious effort to avoid separating you from those who mean the most to you. These self-destructive behaviors could include things like pulling out of investments at the wrong time, giving away money you can't afford to give away, or making repeated financial or business mistakes. In essence, a negative association with rising above your financial comfort zone and becoming, quote, too wealthy can act as a psychological barrier to breaking through to higher socioeconomic status. With regard to the stereotypes of the 1%, our findings will not surprise fans of the classic book, The Millionaire Next Door. There was no significant difference between the mass affluent and the ultra-wealthy in our study with regard to many of these stereotypical assumptions about the rich. For example, most of the wealthy in our study happened to have gone to public school, most were first-generation earners, meaning that they were basically self-made, and most were not against paying their fair share of taxes. Now that said, we found some fascinating psychological differences between the ultra wealthy and the mass affluent. These differences are explored in depth in my Psychology of Wealth video series to give them their due, as they can be very useful for people who want to increase their income and net worth. Question of the day: why would it be okay for you to have or make more money when others around you may not have enough? Hint: if you don't have a solid answer to this question, one that you can feel really good about, it'll be very difficult for you to grow your net worth. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, please consider subscribing. And hey, make sure to check out the video description below for links and resources. See you next time.